Welcome to Here's the Thing. My name is Vince Negro, and with us today is a special guest, Miss Barri Cohen. Thank you for being here with us today on this program.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're a Writers Guild of Canada award-winning producer, writer, editor. I mean, the list is endless. Filmmaker, and we'll get into all of that.
Yeah.
And you're a producer or inventor of the hot docs.
Yeah, I was part of I was part of the founding volunteer board of Hot Dogs.
Of Hot Dogs. Before we get into all that, tell me who Barri was in high school. Who was that something that you always had in the back of your mind to get involved in the arts? Tell us a little bit about who you were in high school.
Two things. I was a real film geek. I was an arts geek, but I was a film geek. I was the kid at 13 and 14. I don't quite know how this happened, but I would clip film reviews out of the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail and put them up on my wall. I thought at the time, because we didn't really have a Canadian film culture, so I didn't imagine it was possible at that time. You know, this was in the 70s. I didn't think, and in the 80s, I didn't think it was possible for us to have a film culture. So I imagined, well, I'll write about film. I'll be a film critic. And my other passion was also, I had a fantasy that, you know, I wanted to be a doctor or a psychiatrist or something. So I'm actually combining those right now because I'm studying counseling at the same time, because to me it's all storytelling.
Yeah.
So when I went to university, I did film studies and psychology. I did them both. I did film studies because I thought, well, I'll be a film critic. And I was really interested in film culture, and I'll write about film history and film culture. But, you know, there wasn't much of a Canadian one. And in fact, there's quite an interesting film history of Canada always knocking at the door and pressing for a space for us to create our own work.
Just listening to you talking about that, I remember Brian Linehan on the Old City, and he was, to me, he was one of the most amazing interviewer. I don't think
he had a great research team.
He's a great research team. He would he would shock people on air in terms of his research and his background. And when I think of that, I go back there. I was originally involved a little bit with a guy called Bill Marshall, who was part of the Festival of Festivals. Legend, right?
Legendary guy.
Legendary. With Dusty and those guys. Dusty Cole and that whole crew.
That foundation of TIFF.
Yeah. Did you have any involvement in that whole? That was almost a turn of a.
Well, I was a teenager when that came up. I was a young teenager when that came up, and I remember crashing TIFF parties when I was in grade 11. Yeah. When you could do that.
Yeah.
When you could do that, and there'd be in a discotheque, you know, at Bloor and Yonge, and you could peek beyond the small VIP rope to see who was there. I have clear memories of some Canadian actresses dancing on the floor, and so I wasn't, I was involved as a dedicated patron, and then would write about it. And eventually, I had a colleague of mine who was in charge of programming the industry center, so I would help her on that, and this was in the early 90s.
So you always had this artistic film critic feel for you. When did you feel that you really got into that industry full time? Was it a break you got, or is that something you just...
It was a break I got. It was a break that I got before I went off to graduate school, and I did communication studies. I worked with someone who I'm now working with, who is a big mentor of mine, Peter Raymond, White Pine Pictures.
Right.
Their film about Robbie Robertson opened TIFF this year.
Robbie Robertson, yeah.
It was the first time
I met him, actually.
Did you?
Yeah, I did.
Well, it was the first time in Canadian, in TIFF's history, that they ever opened with a documentary, let alone a Canadian documentary. And so White Pine Pictures is Peter Raymond. And so my first job, serious job, was working for Peter in the 80s as a researcher and a kind of Girl Friday, basically.
Right.
It was pick up his laundry and write a proposal. And his office was at the top floor of his house at near Kensington Market at College and
Augusta?
and Augusta. He was right on Major Street.
Right. The doing a lot of these different areas, the writing, the producing, the filming. Which today? Where do you have a favorite part of that business that you like doing more than another?
It's a good question. I like supporting I like the producing part of long-form documentary, working with filmmakers. I myself only have the stomach to make a film once every few years, partly because I was a single mother and raising a family, whether you're a single parent or not, it's very challenging. The arts are not very forgiving of a family. Yes. And making a film where you have to get on a plane or spend all hours in the edit room is not very family friendly. So I found that a lot of the work that I ended up doing was a lot of television series producing. I loved doing that. I'm stepping back from that and focusing more on the long form, producing and supporting other filmmakers, like with Toxic Beauty, the very talented Phyllis Ellis, who's did an amazing job with this film, which just premiered this month on CBC's documentary channel. Was voted one of the top 10 documentaries this year, or of 2019, by POV magazine, a magazine I was once the editor of. So, part of me, it's hard to say what's favorite. I love doing that, and I love digging in to a story myself as a filmmaker and a story editor, where I can address gaps in social justice, basically. I've always had a keen sense of fair play. Right. And when that's lacking, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's small stuff like endless TTC buses going by that people can't get on because we don't have, the resources, to larger gaps of where fair play has fallen down. And I like to go after that and go, well, wait a second, this isn't fair. How do we get the word out?